Welcome to Learn English Through Story. Dear friends, today I am going to take you on a journey far, far away from the busy, noisy world we live in. I am going to take you to a time when magic was real, when kindness had a face, and when the greatest joy in the world was not gold or silver, but simply seeing someone else smile. This is a story about two tiny creatures who worked in secret every single night, asking for nothing in return. This is a story that will warm your heart, touch your soul, and remind you of something very important that we sometimes forget in our busy lives. So sit back, relax, take a deep breath, and let me tell you the story of the secret helpers of Millbrook Village. Long ago, nestled between two great green mountains and beside a river that sparkled like diamonds in the morning sun, there was a small and beautiful village called Millbrook. Millbrook was not a rich village. It had no grand castle, no marketplace filled with expensive jewels, and no powerful king who ruled over its people. But Millbrook had something far more valuable than riches. It had peace. It had warmth, and most of all, it had hard-working, honest, and kind-hearted people. The villagers of Millbrook woke up before the sun every single morning. The farmers tended to their fields while the dew was still fresh on the grass. The craftsmen sharpened their tools and began their work while the sky was still painted purple and pink. The women of the village baked, sewed, and cared for their families with love and dedication. The children went to school, learned their lessons well, and helped their parents in the evenings. Every single person in Millbrook worked hard, and every single person in Millbrook was happy. But here is the most magical and mysterious thing about Millbrook Village. No matter how much work there was, no matter how long the list of tasks seemed the night before, by morning, everything was always finished. Always. The bread was baked, the crops were harvested, the shoes were repaired, the clothes were sewn, the meat was prepared. Every single morning. The villagers would wake up, stretch their tired arms, rub their sleepy eyes, and look around in pure amazement. How did we finish so much, they would wonder to themselves. But they never questioned it too deeply. They simply smiled, thanked the heavens, and went about their day. But do you know the secret behind Millbrook's magical mornings? Do you know who was truly responsible for all that finished work? Let me tell you. Hidden deep within the ancient oak tree at the edge of the village, there lived two tiny, extraordinary creatures. They were no taller than a candle. Their ears were pointed like the tips of autumn leaves. Their eyes sparkled like fireflies on a summer night. Their fingers were swift and nimble, faster than any human hand could ever be. And their hearts were the biggest and warmest things in all of Millbrook, even if they were hidden in the smallest of bodies. Their names were Pip and Twill. Pip was the older of the two. He had messy silver hair that always stood up in different directions, a tiny brown vest stitched together from fallen bark, and a voice as soft as the wind through autumn grass. He was serious, focused, and always thinking about how to help others more efficiently. Twill was younger, cheerful, and full of energy. She wore a little dress made of woven grass and dried flower petals. She hummed little melodies while she worked, and her laugh, tiny as a bell's chime, could fill an entire room with warmth. She was the faster of the two, and she had a remarkable gift of knowing exactly what needed to be done without being told. Every night, when the last candle in the last home of Millbrook was blown out, Pip and Twill would quietly slip out of their oak tree home. They would tiptoe through the silent village streets, their tiny feet making no sound at all on the cobblestones, and then they would begin their work. The first stop was always the baker's shop. The baker's name was Old Thomas. He was a round, kind man with a flour-dusted apron and red, warm cheeks. Thomas had been baking bread for the village of Millbrook for over 30 years. His bread was legendary, soft in the middle, golden on the outside, and filling in a way that made your whole body feel loved. But baking bread was hard work. Thomas had to wake up long before sunrise to knead the dough, shape the loaves, fill the pies, layer the pastries, and have everything ready before the villagers came to buy their morning food.
For years, poor Thomas barely slept. He would work through the night, his eyes drooping with exhaustion, his fingers sore and stiff, until Pip and Twill arrived. Now, every night after Thomas finally gave in to his exhaustion and dozed off beside his large wooden mixing bowls, the two little elves would sneak through the back window of the bakery and get to work. Twill would immediately begin measuring and mixing the ingredients for the bread dough. Her tiny hands worked with extraordinary speed and precision. A pinch of salt here, a cup of flour there, a spoonful of yeast stirred in just so. She never made a mistake. She never measured wrong. The dough she made was always exactly perfect. Meanwhile, Pip would carefully shape the dough into loaves, pressing each one with gentle and loving hands. He would arrange them in neat rows on the baking trays, slide them into the warm oven, and watch over them carefully. He made sure every loaf was golden brown, every pastry was flaky and light, every pie was sealed perfectly around the edges. By the time the first light of morning began to glow on the horizon, the baker's shop was filled with the most incredible smell. Warm bread, sweet pastries, rich pies, and freshly baked cakes. Everything was perfect. Everything was ready. Old Thomas would wake up, rub his eyes, and stare around his shop in complete wonder. "I must have done all this in my sleep," he would mutter to himself, scratching his head. Then he would smile a big, happy smile and begin laying everything out for his customers. And the villagers would come, buy their bread, and leave smiling, full bellies, happy hearts. Pip and Twill, hidden behind a flour sack near the window, would watch those smiling faces, and that was enough. That was everything. After finishing at the bakery, Pip and Twill would make their way to the other end of the village, to the shop of Marcus the butcher. Marcus was a tall, strong man with broad shoulders and thick arms. He had a gentle heart despite his imposing size. He had a wife, 4 young children, and an old mother who lived with them all under one roof. Every day, Marcus worked from dawn until dusk preparing meat for the villagers, cutting, salting, seasoning, and packaging everything perfectly so the families of Millbrook would have good food on their tables. But Marcus had a problem. He could never seem to finish all his work on time. No matter how early he started or how late he worked, there was always something left undone. The cutlets were not yet cut. The salting was incomplete. The large joints of meat still needed to be divided into smaller portions. Marcus would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, worrying. How would he finish in time? What if the village ran short of food because of him? He did not know that help was already on the way. Every night, when Marcus finally fell into a deep and exhausted sleep, Pip and Twill would creep into the butcher's shop. The smell was strong and the work was heavy, far harder than the bakery. But the 2 little elves never complained. They never stopped to rest. They simply rolled up their tiny sleeves and got to work. Twill would carefully rub the right amount of salt onto each piece of meat, working with focused concentration, making sure every part was properly preserved. She sang quietly to herself as she worked, a tiny, beautiful tune that seemed to make the work go faster. Pip would take the large pieces of meat and with small but incredibly sharp tools divide them into perfectly even portions. The cutlets were sliced cleanly and evenly. The joints were separated with precision. The sausages were tied neatly into links. Every piece of meat was handled with care and respect. By the time morning came, the butcher's shop was completely ready. Every order was prepared. Every piece of meat was perfectly cut, salted, and packaged. Marcus would walk in, look around with wide eyes, and feel a wave of relief and gratitude wash over him. "Thank God," he would whisper softly. "Thank God." He did not know he was also thanking 2 tiny elves who had already slipped back to their oak tree home, tired but deeply satisfied. But Pip and Twill did not stop at just the baker and the butcher. Their kindness had no limits. Some nights, when there was time, they would visit the old cobbler at the end of the lane. Edwin, whose aging hands could no longer stitch shoes as quickly as they once could. Pip and Twill would sit at his tiny workbench and repair shoe after shoe, their nimble fingers threading needles and hammering soles with quiet, rhythmic efficiency. Other nights, they would slip into the home of Anna, the young widow who had 3 small children and spent her evenings desperately trying to finish sewing dresses and shirts that she sold to earn money for her family. Twill especially loved helping Anna. She would sit beside Anna's sewing basket and stitch with such delicate skill that the finished garments always looked more beautiful than anything Anna had ever made herself. Anna would wake in the morning, pick up the clothing she thought she had barely started the night before, and find it perfectly finished. Every stitch in its place, every hem straight and even. She would hold the clothing to her chest and close her eyes, filled with a deep and peaceful gratitude she could not explain. Pip and Twill watched from the windowsill. They saw the tears of relief and happiness in her eyes, and they held each other's tiny hands and smiled. For many years, Pip and Twill worked in complete secrecy. Nobody in Millbrook knew about them. Nobody even suspected that magical creatures were responsible for all the mysterious good fortune of the village. Until one autumn night, everything changed. Old Thomas, the baker, had been feeling increasingly troubled. He was a man of honesty, and something about not knowing how his work was getting done made him deeply uncomfortable. He decided that on this particular night he would pretend to fall asleep, but he would keep one eye open. He sat beside his mixing bowls as usual, let his breathing slow, and closed his eyes almost all the way. And then he waited. At midnight he heard the softest sound, like a whisper of wind. He heard the tiny creak of his back window. He kept himself completely still, barely breathing, and then he saw them. 2 tiny figures, no bigger than his hand, moving through his bakery with swift and purposeful grace. The smaller one, Twill, began measuring flour with a little wooden cup the size of a thimble. The older one, Pip, pulled a tiny rolling pin from his vest pocket and began working the dough with extraordinary speed and skill.
Thomas watched in complete and utter amazement. His mouth fell open, his eyes grew wide. He watched for a long, long time as these 2 miraculous little creatures transformed his bakery, working tirelessly, silently, and joyfully. When the work was nearly finished, he could no longer contain himself. "Who are you?" he whispered gently, not wanting to frighten them. Pip and Twill froze. They looked at each other. Then slowly they turned and looked at the old baker with their bright, shining eyes. There was a long moment of silence. Then Twill let out a tiny giggle. "We are Pip and Twill," she said, in a voice like the tinkling of a small bell, "and we have been helping you for a very, very long time." Thomas felt tears prick the corners of his eyes. "But why?" he asked softly. "Why do you help us? What do you get from it?" Pip tilted his silver head to one side and smiled the most gentle and peaceful smile Thomas had ever seen. "We get everything," he said simply. "We get to see you smile." By morning, Thomas had told his wife. By afternoon, his wife had told 3 neighbors. By evening, all of Millbrook knew the story of Pip and Twill. The reaction of the villagers was not what the 2 little elves had expected. They did not run in fear. They did not demand explanations or try to capture the elves. Instead, they gathered at the great oak tree at the edge of the village, and they simply stood there. Men, women, children, the baker, the butcher, the cobbler, the young widow Anna and her children, all of them standing quietly together. And one by one, they placed small gifts at the base of the oak tree. A tiny loaf of bread baked with extra care. A small cloth made from the softest material Anna had. A little pair of shoes perfectly sized for the smallest feet, made by old Edwin with his most careful stitching. And then the village of Millbrook made a promise to each other. They promised that from that day forward they would look after one another the way Pip and Twill had looked after them.
They would help their neighbors without being asked. They would finish each other's work in times of need. They would give without expecting anything in return. They would carry the spirit of the two little elves in their own human hearts. From that day on, Millbrook became even more wonderful than it had ever been before. Not because the magic elves continued doing everything, though Pip and Twill never truly stopped their nightly rounds, but because the villagers themselves became kinder, more helpful, and more generous with each other. Children helped elderly neighbors carry water from the well. Farmers shared their surplus crops with families who had less. The baker began leaving a small loaf outside his door each morning for anyone who was hungry. Marcus, the butcher, began setting aside small packages of meat every week for the poorest families in the village.
And at the center of all of it, living quietly in their great oak tree, Pip and Twill watched. And every single night, when they looked out the warm, golden lights of Millbrook's homes and heard the distant sound of laughter and contentment drifting through the air, they felt a happiness so deep and so full that no words could ever truly describe it. Because that is the nature of true kindness, dear friends. It does not drain you. It does not make you poor. It does not take anything away from you. True kindness fills you up every single time. And so, dear friends, that is the story of the secret helpers of Millbrook Village, the story of two tiny creatures with the biggest hearts in the world, the story of a village that learned that kindness is not a weakness, it is the greatest strength a person can ever have. So today, I want to ask you one simple question. Think about it carefully. Think about it honestly. Is there someone in your life whose burden you could quietly help carry? Maybe a tired parent who needs a little extra help at home. Maybe a struggling friend who just needs someone to listen. Maybe a neighbor who could use a warm meal or a kind word on a difficult day. You do not need to be a magical elf to make a difference. You just need to care. And the moment you choose to care, the moment you choose to give without expecting anything in return, you will discover what Pip and Twill discovered long, long ago in the little village of Millbrook. That the greatest reward in life is not what you receive, it is the smile on someone else's face because of something you did. Thank you so much for listening to today's story on Learn English Through Story. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and do not forget to subscribe to Learn English Through Story so you never miss a new story. Until next time, be kind, be generous, and never ever underestimate the power of a warm heart. Goodbye for now, and remember, the world is always better with a little more kindness in it.